Now, the rest of the story. In the heroic history of the United States Navy, the words of Captain James Lawrence shine like a beacon. Mortally wounded, he would call out to his men, "Don't give up the ship." And ever since, that command has represented America's persistent intolerance of defeat. Don't give up the ship. So what was the dramatic birth of that deathless battle cry? You're going to see. Young Jim Lawrence was eager to get on with his life. Attracted to both the law and the Navy, he ultimately chose the Navy. Took only 3 years for Jim to work his way up to first lieutenant. Then came what was sometimes referred to as the Second War of Independence. Of course, history books mostly call it the War of 1812, but by the time hostilities had erupted between the United States and England, Jim Lawrence was master commandant of several ships, and early in the conflict he was responsible for impressive naval victories off the coast of South America. Now, it's noon, June 1, 1813. The American warship Chesapeake weighed anchor and set sail for Boston. At the mouth of Boston Harbor prowled the British warship Shannon. And the Shannon's crew, weary of idle blockade duty, was eager for battle. Now, under ordinary circumstances, such eagerness might have advantaged the British. But the American vessel, the Chesapeake, had the upper hand in this. Her captain was the cunning, tenacious James Lawrence. He was 31 by now, possessed the wisdom of a seasoned warrior by now. But his enthusiasm was youthful as ever, and yes, it was for this naval encounter that he would best be remembered. As Bostonians watched from shore, the Chesapeake and the Shannon stalked each other. After a point running parallel, the two ships drew closer, anticipating that the windward Chesapeake would try to cut across the Shannon's stern. The British captain ordered his crew to hit the deck, but the American vessel continued on course. Virtually side by side now, the ships exchanged fire. Captain Lawrence, standing boldly on the quarterdeck in full dress uniform, presented his foe an obvious target. The musket shot which felled him was fired by a British lieutenant named Law. Promptly the Chesapeake veered into the wind, her stern ramming the rails of the Shannon. And as brave Captain Lawrence lay dying, he issued that now famous command to his men: "Don't give up the ship." Generations of stubborn American fighting men would rally by that battle cry. The phrase has become proverbial among traditionally uncompromising countrymen of Captain James Lawrence. And yet Lawrence himself, who uttered those words as he was taken below, would never know that his vessel, the Chesapeake, was destined to be refitted and to serve throughout the remainder of the war as a British warship. That's right, because only minutes after the dying captain cried, "Don't give up the ship," his men gave up the ship. Only now you know the rest of the story.
And now the rest of the story. Don't give up the ship. When the Battle of Boston Harbor took place on June the 1st, 1813, the ship and its crew were not in their best form. Less than 2 months earlier, the Chesapeake returned to Boston for repairs and alterations. Samuel Evans, then captain of the Chesapeake, was in poor health and, at his request, was relieved of command. On May 20th, 1813, Captain James Lawrence took command of the Chesapeake. Crew members were steadily leaving as their enlistments were expiring daily. They were replaced by sailors from the warship Constitution. The British Navy warship HMS Shannon was in much better shape. Philip Broke had been captain of the 38-gun frigate for 7 years. He drilled his crew for hours each day. Captain Broke had his cannons fitted with sights and degree-bearing marks to increase accuracy. However, Captain Broke and his crew were somewhat weary. They had been patrolling the area for 56 days and provisions were running low. While the Chesapeake was being refitted, Captain Lawrence knew the British ship was patrolling just outside the port of Boston on blockade duty. By the end of May, the British ship had moved closer to Boston. Captain Broke knew the Chesapeake was being refitted and waited for it to leave the safety of the harbor, but he grew tired of waiting. He sent a challenge to Captain Lawrence for a single ship-to-ship combat, but Captain Lawrence left port before he received the challenge. Captain Lawrence was confident that he would win the battle. He wrote a note to the Secretary of the Navy which detailed his plan to meet the Shannon in combat. He also wrote a letter to his brother-in-law in which he asked him to take care of his wife and children if the worst should happen. On the morning of June the 1st, 1837, the Chesapeake left port and headed toward the British warship. Rather than the American flag, the Chesapeake flew a white flag with the motto, "Free Trade and Sailors' Rights." Now people gathered all along the harbor to watch the battle. Civilians in their personal boats followed the Chesapeake out of port. Dock workers reserved a space on the dock for the expected captured British ship. Although the Chesapeake and Shannon were of different designs, they were similar in length, width, tonnage, and weapons. The Chesapeake had 379 men, while the Shannon had 330. At about 5:30 p.m., the two ships were within range of each other. At about 6 o'clock, both ships opened fire. It resembled the battle scenes from Pirates of the Caribbean. As was the common practice for British sailors at the time, they aimed not to disable the Chesapeake, but to kill its crew. Within moments of the first shots being fired, smoke from the gunpowder engulfed both ships like a heavy fog. Cannon shot, oak and metal splinters, and other parts of the ship filled the air. Through the ensuing chaos, the surviving crew members of both ships retained their composure. As Mr. Harvey explained, Captain Lawrence was fatally injured by musket fire. As 3 sailors carried Captain Lawrence from the upper deck to the relative safety of the cockpit, Captain Lawrence yelled, "Tell the men to fire faster! Don't give up the ship!" Moments later, Captain Broke led a boarding party onto the Chesapeake. As the British sailors rushed aboard the Chesapeake, they were met with small arms fire. Most of the crew had abandoned the upper decks. Captain Broke was wounded during the fight, but Lieutenant Charles Faulkner of the Shannon ended the battle when he yelled to the American deck, "We have 300 men aboard. If there is another act of hostility, you will be called up on deck one by one and shot." Faulkner was given command of the Chesapeake as a British prize vessel. The Shannon lost 23 men and 56 wounded. The Chesapeake lost 48 men and 99 wounded. The Shannon was hit by 158 projectiles to Chesapeake's 362. According to the ship's log, the engagement lasted just 10 minutes. There's a small naval cemetery in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is situated behind the Maritime Command Museum. A naval hospital was once located beside the cemetery. If you get a chance to visit the cemetery, you will see 2 stone monuments sitting side by side. One is in memory of the sailors from the Shannon, the other in memory of the sailors from the Chesapeake. You know that battle cry, "Don't give up the ship," is just as relevant in our modern world as it was in the War of 1812. No matter what life throws at us, don't give up the ship. Don't give up. There is always hope that tomorrow will be a better day than today. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and as Paul Harvey would say, good day.